If you've seen the earlier videos, you already know something important. Audit exposure doesn't start with a bad note. It starts when documentation becomes pattern visible. And once that happens, notes aren't read generously anymore. Rather, they're read comparatively. That's where this advice matters, because the most common mistake professionals make at this stage is subtle. They keep assuming their intent will be inferred. Most of the time, that assumption feels reasonable. You know what you meant, your colleagues know how you work, and the decision made sense in context. So, the note feels clear to you. However, once documentation is being reviewed across time, across cases, across providers, intent stops filling gaps. What replaces it is pattern recognition. And patterns don't ask, what did they mean? They ask, how often does this look like this? This is where people misunderstand what went wrong. They think scrutiny increased because something specific looked bad. Usually, it's because the system can no longer rely on implication. Let me say that more clearly. Once intent has to be inferred, interpretation is required. And interpretation is exactly what reviewers are trained to avoid. So here's the rule. Stop documenting for a reader who fills in gaps. Document for a reader who doesn't. That's the shift. And it doesn't mean writing more. It means writing so the logic stands on its own. Here's a general example that most clinicians might be able to recognize. A note said something like, plan reviewed, no changes at this time. To the writer, that feels complete. The reasoning happened. The decision was sound. But to a comparative reader, that sentence raises quiet questions. Reviewed against what? Why no changes? What conditions made no change appropriate this time? If that phrasing repeats across notes, the pattern becomes visible. Now, let's ground this in a more specific real-world scenario. Imagine documenting a decision not to take an expected action. The note says, procedure deferred, patient stable. That feels efficient. It feels obvious. But stability is doing a lot of unspoken work here. Stable how? Stable compared to what threshold? Stable enough to justify deferral today? When that language appears repeatedly, reviewers don't read it as shorthand. They read it as missing rationale. And this is where people get nervous and overcorrect. They add disclaimers. They add volume. They add defensive language. That actually makes things worse. Because the goal isn't protection. The goal is legibility. The system isn't asking you to explain yourself. It's asking you to remove the need for explanation. So, instead of assuming intent will be understood, the decision rule becomes simple. Name the decision. Name the reason. And anchor it to an observable condition. Not emotionally, not defensively, just explicitly. I've seen this exact shift reduce attention over time. Not instantly, but reliably. Because when interpretation disappears, scrutiny eventually does too. And if you've ever had the same sense that your notes suddenly started reading differently to others, now you know why.